You wake up to an alarm. You pack a bag, join a commute, and head to a place you are required to be. For most of us, every morning begins with a question of schedule rather than choice. Modern humans spend about 90,000 hours of their lives working. That is 1/3 of your entire waking existence dedicated to a job. For 99% of our history, that wasn't the case. For roughly 300,000 years, there were no wages, there were no bosses, and no career ladders to climb. It is easy to assume that prehistoric life was a frantic, desperate fight against the elements, with every waking second spent barely surviving. But archaeological evidence suggests otherwise. When we compare ancient skeletons to early farmers, the hunters are taller, have better teeth, and show significantly fewer signs of the joint damage caused by repetitive physical labor. By reconstructing a single prehistoric 24-hour day, we can see exactly what our ancestors were doing with their time and how their daily routine contrasts with the one we live now. The day begins without an alarm. You wake up around dawn, eat leftover meat or gathered fruit from the day before, and sit around the fire. There is no rush to leave. You plan the day loosely, based on what the group needs. In 1963, anthropologist Richard Lee tracked the daily activities of the Juhansi people in Botswana. He found that the adults in this group spent only about 2.5 days per week acquiring food. That totals roughly 15 to 17 hours a week spent on survival. For context, the average modern person works more than twice that much. If the group decided to hunt, they used a method called persistence hunting. Humans can sweat to regulate body temperature while running, but most animals cannot. We track them at a steady jog for hours until they overheat and collapse. Because this method was so efficient, the productive part of the day was usually finished by the early afternoon. Once the meat was back at camp, the focus shifted. For the next 6 hours, people did things that have no immediate practical benefit. They napped in the shade, groomed each other, played with children, and simply existed without needing to justify their time. This wasn't just idleness. In a world without money or police, survival depended entirely on the strength of your relationships. Socializing was the primary safety net. If you weren't liked, you weren't fed. We can see the results of this free time in the Chauvet Cave in France. These 30,000-year-old paintings use perspective, shading, and movement. They represent hours, perhaps days, of focused work that had nothing to do with finding food. In the Blombos Cave, archaeologists found shell jewelry that required a 40-kilometer round trip to collect, and hours of delicate drilling with stone tools, just to look good. In Germany, researchers found a flute carved from a vulture bone with 5 perfectly spaced holes. The person who made this understood pitch and music, and they spent significant time crafting an object designed purely for entertainment. These artifacts suggest that ancient humans didn't spend their lives struggling to survive. They spent their lives finding things to do because they had the time to seek out beauty and meaning. As night fell, the nature of communication shifted. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner analyzed hundreds of hours of conversations among the Juhansi. During the day, talk was practical, where the animal tracks were or who wasn't sharing fairly. But at night, 81% of campfire conversation was dedicated to stories, myths, and jokes. Their sleep was also different. Before artificial light, humans slept in 2 phases. They would sleep for 4 hours, wake up for a short period in the middle of the night, and then sleep for another 4 hours. That wakeful hour in total darkness was used for quiet reflection, tending the fire, or sharing myths. This combination of full stomachs, firelight, and social storytelling provided the environment where humans began to think about gods, ancestors, and the future. If the 15-hour workweek was so successful, we have to ask why we stopped. Roughly 10,000 years ago, humans in the Fertile Crescent began planting seeds and domesticating animals. Farming produced more food, allowing populations to grow. But larger populations required even more farming to sustain them. Once populations exploded, there was no going back. Humanity was locked into a cycle of plowing and harvesting that required far more labor. The skeletal record shows the cost. These early farmers were shorter, had spines damaged by repetitive field work, and suffered from cavities caused by grain-heavy diets. They worked harder and died younger than the hunters who came before them. Agriculture traded the freedom of time for the security of a larger population. As those populations grew into cities, societies needed specialists, administrators, soldiers, and laborers. This created the concept of trading your time for resources. The job became the only way to survive within the system we created. Today, we measure a successful life through productivity, wealth, and constant new achievements. Our ancestors woke up every morning already free, already enough, and with nothing to prove to a supervisor or a schedule. We spend 90,000 hours of our lives in the modern grind, often for the sole purpose of retiring into the exact life of leisure and community that our ancestors enjoyed every day by default.